Coming up today, President Park Geun-hye is in Paris for global climate change talks. She'll tell world leaders how Korea is planning to slash greenhouse gas emissions over the next 15 years. Tens of thousands of people in cities around the world take to the streets to demand world leaders in Paris take action to combat climate change. Plus, Korea's rival parties reach a provisional agreement to ratify the Korea-China Free Trade Agreement later today. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Monday, November 30th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this morning, President Park Geun-hye is in Paris on the first leg of her latest overseas tour. The South Korean leader is one of the almost 150 heads of state in the French capital for the UN's highly anticipated conference on climate change. President Park will lay out how Korea plans to meet its own ambitious targets. Our Hwang Sang-hee reports from Paris.
President Park arrived in Paris on Sunday to attend the UN Climate Change Conference. She'll be received by French President François Hollande and UN Secretary-General Ban Kimoon at Monday's opening ceremony. Here, President Park will address some 140 heads of state.
Through her keynote speech, President Park will join international efforts for the launch of a new climate system. She will also explain Korea's efforts to counter climate change by proposing a target for emissions reductions and contribution to the Green Climate Fund.
Previously, the UN-led talks focused on haggling over the developed world's targets for emissions reductions. But this year, they emphasize action by all countries. All participants submitted national climate change plans ahead of time, known as intended nationally determined contributions. Korea has set the ambitious goal of slashing greenhouse gas emissions by 37% by 2030. As an end product of this year's meeting, world leaders are aiming to achieve a successor treaty to the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Korea's presidential office says the global climate talks will be an opportunity for Korea to assert itself as a middle power, as it will serve as a bridge between advanced and developing nations. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News, Paris.
UN Secretary-General Ban Kimoon and French President François Hollande have warned that failure to reach an agreement at the climate talks in Paris would have disastrous consequences. In a statement on its website, the UN said Ban and Hollande held in-depth discussions on the status of the negotiations for the adoption of an agreement in Paris. They also identified some of the key issues still under discussion and considered ways to move forward. The UN said the two leaders agreed that failure was not an option this time around. The last major climate conference held in Copenhagen in 2009 ended with no legally binding commitments. Around 100 people have been arrested in Paris after a climate change protest turned violent. The city's chief of police says officers identified hundreds of people who had violated a ban on all protests in the wake of the recent terror attacks on the French capital. Some of those arrested threw projectiles at police who themselves fired numerous rounds of tear gas to disperse the crowds. Earlier in the day, thousands of pairs of shoes were placed in Paris's main square in protest as the authorities cancelled a climate change march. The installation was organised by a local activist group to reflect the steps marchers had been prevented from taking. Tens of thousands of people were able to rally in London on Sunday, though, which was the largest of the 2,500 events taking place around the world. Rallies were also held in Sydney, New York, Berlin and Seoul. Now, there's an even more concerning aspect of climate change, though, and as well as that, climate-related natural disasters. It's that people are becoming less worried about it, and South Korea is absolutely no exception. According to a recent survey conducted by the US-based Pew Research Center, 48% of Koreans believe climate change is a very serious problem now, but that's down from 68% in 2010. A more concerning trend was seen in Turkey, with the biggest drop from 74% to 37%. And in China, where less than 1/5 of respondents said they were very concerned about the climate issue. On the other hand, the US and France saw the number of people who viewed climate change as a serious problem increase. The result of the survey was released ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris. Now, in other news, the health ministers of Korea, China and Japan have reached agreement on ways they can work together to tackle public health emergencies such as outbreaks of Middle East respiratory syndrome or Ebola. In a joint statement following their tripartite summit in Kyoto on Sunday, the three ministers said they plan to work more with the World Health Organization to monitor health threats and share information. A special emergency hotline between the ministries was also suggested to speed up communication. The Korean health minister agreed to share the country's experience with MERS. The MERS outbreak hit Korea early this year, killing 38 people. The ministers also discussed ways to tackle problems resulting from aging populations, an urgent issue all three nations currently face. Now, after more than 6 months of discussions, Korea's main rival parties have finally reached a tentative agreement on ratifying the Korea-China Free Trade Agreement. The floor leaders of the ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy made the announcement after an overnight meeting on Sunday. They said they had tentatively agreed to hold a plenary session at the National Assembly on Monday to work on the ratification of this huge FTA. However, there are still concerns of a last-minute opposing move from the NPAD over measures to protect the industries that will be most hardest hit by the FTA deal, including Korea's agricultural sector. Now, in economic news, two consortiums led by IT giants Kakao and KT have been chosen to run Korea's first internet-only banks. The Financial Services Commission on Sunday granted preliminary licenses to Kakao Bank, consisting of 11 companies, including Gungmin Bank and K-Bank, which includes Uri Bank and GS Retail. The decision comes after a 2-month review of applications from 3 bidders, including iBank, led by online shopping mall operator Interpark. Financial stability, shareholding structure and customer service plans were some of the attributes that were reviewed. The financial regulator anticipates the two banks will play a role in helping revive Korea's slumping banking industry. The FSC expects the first internet-only bank to open in June 2016. Now, good news for foreign tourists to Korea, because those that shop at local duty-free stores will get on-the-spot tax refunds starting from January next year. With the change, visitors won't have to show their receipts to customs officials when leaving Korea to get the refund. The Finance Ministry says foreign tourists who buy items that cost less than 200,000 Korean won, or around $170 will be eligible for immediate tax refunds at duty-free shops across the country. In addition, each person will be allowed to buy up to $865 worth of products. According to the ministry, around 80% of all tax refunds in the first half of the year were given for products that cost less than $173. The plan will be submitted to the Cabinet next month. Now, Korea's economic report card for 2015 isn't looking very good at all. The Korean economy is likely to miss its target of 3% growth, and other indicators such as exports and consumer price growth are also far lower than usual. Kwon Jang-ho has the details.
It's been a tough year for Korea, and it's showing in the country's end-of-year numbers. The OECD, IMF and Bank of Korea have all set Korea's end-of-year GDP growth forecast at 2.7%. That's a significant step down from last year's growth of 3.3%. The outbreak of the Middle East respiratory syndrome in the summer caused a lot of damage, affecting tourism and consumer spending. The economy grew 0.8% in the first quarter, but plummeted to 0.3% in the second quarter during the height of the MERS outbreak. Although the third quarter produced a 5-year quarterly high of 1.2% growth after the government injected a stimulus package to make up for the damage caused by the MERS crisis, the effects of the stimulus appears to have worn off, and this year's growth now looks unlikely to break the 3% mark.
There are many who are saying that 3% growth is unlikely. We'll try to do our best, but there does seem to be a risk of a drop in growth.
MERS was not the only factor affecting Korea's economy this year. A marked slowdown in demand from China and other Asian countries has also had a significant effect on exports this year, in addition to the slump in oil prices. The Bank of Korea predicts exports will drop 6.4% from last year, while the state-run think tank Korea Development Institute expects that figure to drop as low as minus 8.7%. It will be the first year of negative growth in exports since 2012. This year's consumer price growth is also expected to reach a 17-year low. Due to low oil prices and a sluggish global economy, the country's consumer price growth only reached 0.6% at the end of October, and it looks unlikely it will break the year-end 0.8% low it reached in 1998 during the height of the Asian financial crisis. Economic analysts are expecting the Korean economy to fare better in 2016, but that is barring any unforeseen circumstances like the MERS crisis. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now, sales of hybrid cars in Korea have hit a record high so far this year, with Volkswagen's diesel emissions scandal pushing sales up as well. The combined sales of hybrid cars manufactured by Korea's Hyundai Motor and Japan's Toyota surpassed 24,000 units in the first 10 months of the year. Korea's largest automaker said its hybrid car sales in the country surged 20% in the January to October period from the same period last year. Toyota reported a 23% increase. The two countries lead hybrid car sales in Korea. Now, sales at brick-and-mortar stores fell in the United States on two of the biggest shopping days of the year as more Americans hunted down deals online. According to research firm Shopper Trek, total sales in the US on Black Friday fell by 10% to $10.4 billion this year, while sales on Thanksgiving dropped by the same percentage to $1.8 billion. Now, technology can be blamed for the decline as online sales jumped more than 14% from last year. Aggressive marketing by online retailers also played a huge role, with online shops bombarding customers with email discounts and ads for bargains. The body of a Russian pilot killed when his plane was shot down by Turkey last week was delivered to Ankara on Sunday after being retrieved from Syria. According to sources, a coffin carrying Oleg Peshkov was flown to Ankara, where it was met by Moscow's ambassador and military attaché. It was not immediately disclosed when the body would be repatriated to Russia, though. The shooting down of the Russian warplane by NATO member Turkey has pretty much wrecked relations between two of the main powers involved in the conflict in Syria. Moscow has responded with fury, imposing punitive economic sanctions on Turkey. Now, climate experts say an extreme El Nino, the strongest in nearly 20 years in fact, will make winter in Korea a bit milder than normal this year. But first, a cold spell will hit the peninsula next month in December, with some snow expected in coastal regions. Our Won-jeon has the details.
El Nino is an abnormal climate cycle where the Pacific Ocean heats up near the equator as trade winds weaken across the Pacific. This phenomenon can affect weather around the world and raise global temperatures. And climate experts say that's exactly what we're about to see in Korea, a warmer winter. But that's after Korea undergoes some extreme weather fluctuations next month, as cold air from the North Pole is expected to descend onto the Korean peninsula in December.
Warm air from the south will flow into Korea, while cold air will descend from the north. These conflicting air movements will result in unstable climate conditions.
Experts also said there may be some heavy snow along the coast. The cold snap will be over by January, when the El Nino effects officially kick in to bring warmer temperatures through February. Forecasters added the precipitation will remain low in Korea this winter, meaning the severe drought will continue until next year. Won Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Monday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome. Have a great day and a great start to the week as well. And thank you as always for tuning in. Goodbye.